I'd like to call to order the November 30th meeting of the Trumbull Pension Board. And tonight we're going to be hearing from, for the last time, Brad Fisher on our actuarial results. Brad, if you could please.
All right. I may go ahead and share my screen here if I can figure out how to do that with only one screen. All right, so hopefully you can see the presentation that you say no?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right, so I mentioned I am retiring at the end of the year, and Kevin is going to be taking over for me in my spot. And Kevin has many years of governmental plan experience. We work together. He's the lead actuary for the city of Nashville, and he works with various municipalities in a number of different states. So I know he will be able to take very good care of you, and I think you'll enjoy working with him. Okay, so let's see. So tonight we want to talk about the valuation results. This was as of July 1st of 2022. I know there's always some change in the committee, so I want to talk a little bit about the process, and we'll compare results to what we've had in recent years, including looking at the funded status of the plan and then talking about the actuarially determined contribution. We'll talk a little bit about assumptions because we do have a recommended change. Maria asked us to look at a couple of different assumption sets, so we'll do that as well. So as far as our process goes, what we're doing as actuaries is we're kind of modeling what's going to happen in the future to make financial measurements related to the plan. So kind of some of the inputs that go into that, there's the written plan document that the town of Trumbull has adopted that talks about what people's benefits are based on how long they work, and the 2% of average earnings per year of service. And then we collect the census data. We also get that from the town. We also get a little bit of information from Principal, since they're paying out the benefits to the retirees. We kind of see what updates there are through them. So we gather the information that way, and then we're getting plan asset information from Byrne and then Principal as well. And then as needed to fill in information, we kind of go back to the town as well. And then with the terms of the plan, the data of the plan, the assets, we're then using actuarial methods and assumptions to make these financial measurements related to the plan. The Governmental Accounting Standards Boards, they have some input on methods and assumptions regarding your accounting. And then we're also involved in the methods and assumptions that get used for funding purposes, which is really what we're talking about tonight. And there's some input with the town as well, as far as thinking about what is the future likely to look like, and what kind of approach is going to be used to fund the plan. And when we talk about performing an actuarial valuation, there's actually 3 different ones that we have to do, and that's related to the plan's financial reporting and the town's financial reporting that goes into the town's financial statements. And then there's and those are both specified by GASB, how those are performed. But then we also do a valuation that's for funding purposes, how much cash needs to be put into the plan to fund the benefits. All these valuations, they're being done every other year. And the actual cost method for the GASB purposes, it's specified, which you have to use. And so back in 2016, we switched to that same method so that we'd be using the same method for all purposes. For GASB, when we talk about valuing what the assets are, we're talking about simply what is the market value at the end of the year. For funding purposes, we actually use a smooth value to kind of eliminate some of the noise when you've got a lot of volatility. You know, the year that ended in 2022 was really not a good year at all. The year that ended in 2021 was a great year. So what the smoothing does is it when assets are doing really great, it kind of cuts off the peaks of the mountains. And then when things are going really bad, it kind of fills in the valleys a little bit so that you've got less volatility. And we'll talk a little bit more about the asset smoothing, because asset smoothing is also used in the police plan. They smooth over 5 years. Currently with the town, we've been smoothing over 3 years. So that was something that Maria had asked us to look at. And then amortization method. We are amortizing unfunded liabilities over the closed 25-year period that started in 2016. So here in 2022, we've got 19 years left in that closed amortization period. So we're talking about having liabilities fully funded by the year 2041. All right, so that's kind of a broad overview of process. Any questions before I jump into actual results? So here's a summary of our primary assumptions that we're using. We're assuming that assets will return 7.25% per year. And we'll talk a little bit about how that compares to a greater universe of municipal plans. Mortality, we're using a 1994 table. And so that's something that we made a recommendation back in 2020 to consider updating that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Assumed out salary increases of 3.5% per year. I know usually when I talk about assumptions right now, people are saying, oh, well, you know, we haven't seen those kind of raises in quite a while. And so we do look at these on a long-term basis. The raises not only include, you know, cost of living, but they include amounts for steps that people have in their job, and then as well as promotions that occur over someone's career. We're not assuming a lot of turnover, and we have retirement rates that start at 55 and go into the 70s. So this next page shows a summary of some of the basic results. You know, the pension plan is closed to new entrants. So you can see back in 2018, there were 365 actively employed participants, and that's now down to 263 in our 2022 valuation. And overall, the number of participants, including beneficiaries that are also receiving, is at 748 compared to 809 back in 2018. And since our active population is going down, you can see that the covered payroll, so the 263 active participants had covered payroll of about 14.2 million. And then our results. So the market value of plan assets as of July 1, 2022 was 43.3 million. And I mentioned, you know, that this last year was very poor in the investment markets. Stocks got hit hard, bond values got hit hard. So it wasn't a great year. And the smoothing that we do, to the extent that we have losses or performance less than what we've assumed, we feather that in over a 3-year period. So we're always recognizing all of the experience, but we just don't recognize it immediately. So our smooth value or actuarial value of assets is 47.2 million roughly. And when we look at the actuarial liability of 95 million, so that's kind of a theoretical number. If the plan was funded as a level percentage of pay throughout everyone's career, and all the assumptions were realized perfectly, then the liability and the assets would both be roughly 95 million. But using that smooth value of 47.2 million compared to the 95 million in liabilities gives us a funded ratio of about 49.6%, which you can see is up, about 8% back from 2018. So I'll give you, I've got some more information to share about a greater universe. So this plan is, it's not funded as well as a typical governmental plan, and there's some history related to why that is, but I think the train is moving in the right direction at this point. When we talk about required funding, we break it up into two pieces. There's a normal cost, and kind of the easiest way to think about the normal cost is that's the cost of providing the pension benefits for the next year for your active employees that are still working. So the 263 people, the normal cost for those individuals is about 586,000. And you can see that's declined over the last two valuations, largely because we've got fewer employees in the plan. But then to that normal cost, we're then amortizing the unfunded liability. So the difference between that 95 million in liabilities and the 47.2 million in actuarial assets. So that's what, $47.8 million of unfunded liability that we're recognizing as a level dollar amount by the year 2041, so that it'll be fully amortized. And when we add that in, we come up with the actuarially determined contribution for the next year of $5,171,000. And that compares to, if you look back at 2020, it was roughly 5.3 million. So the plan's a little bit better funded. We had a good asset year back in 2021, not so good in 2022. So that helped kind of push the cost down a little bit. And this number, the 5,171,000, that's before we consider any assumption changes. And then this is just a chart showing the funded ratios for the last three valuations. And then here's a comparison kind of talking about how the Town of Trumbull plan would be benchmarked against a study that Wilshire released earlier this year on other city and county retirement systems. And you can see that the Town of Trumbull plan is not as well funded as the typical plan. But you also will see that over the period, the Town of Trumbull plan has made more progress than the other plan universe. And so I mentioned that I think that your plan is on the right track, that both the changes that we made in the methods back in 2016, as well as the way the plan's actually been funded over the last number of years has helped bring that funded percentage up. Excuse me, I'm gonna see if I can pop in a throat lozenge here to get me through this. The other thing I was going to mention is the assumed discount rate. We're assuming a 7.25% return, whereas the typical plan was assuming 7%. So we're a little bit more aggressive than the median plan, but not a lot more aggressive. So we're still in the meaty part of the curve there. So I'm going to skip ahead to 11 just to talk a little bit about actuarial assumptions and the role that they play. So we're going to be talking about some recommended assumption changes for your consideration. And so what happens is when we change assumptions, we come up with a different measurement of what the plan's liabilities are. And it's important to remember that at the end of the day, whatever assumptions we make, they're not going to affect the actual cost of operating your plan. That actual cost is going to be impacted by the actual experience of your plan participants. When do they retire? How long do they live once they retire? What is their pay when they retire? All those things will impact what you actually have to pay out of the plan. So the measurements that we're making, they're approximations of what we think is going to happen. And we want to have the best possible assumptions so that you have the best information about operating the plan. If the assumptions that we make are too optimistic, they're more optimistic than the actual experience that happens, then eventually the plan is going to have losses that need to be recognized. And that's going to result in increased funding levels. By the same token, if assumptions are less optimistic than actual experience, then the plan is actually going to recognize gains that will later on decrease required funding levels. So we're trying to get it right in the middle so that you've got the best information and aren't subject to a lot of changes. So with that, let's go back and look at the assumptions that we're talking about looking at. That first column, this is looking at the actuarially determined contribution. The first column is the status quo. What if we leave all of our assumptions the same? And you can see that's the 5,171,000. Back in 2020, we recommended that the town consider updating its mortality assumption. We suggested either back in 2020 or in 2022. And the updated mortality assumption is a table that was released in 2019. So it's like 25 years more recent than the table that you're currently using. And also another factor about the table that was released in 2019, it was a table that was prepared just based on governmental public employer information. So we're talking about the experience of other public employees, so state governments, town governments, different utility districts and whatnot. And these are all, we're talking about using the general employee tables. There's separate tables for teachers or fire and police, but so we're talking about the general employees. So if we were to go ahead and update the mortality assumption, which would be a much better reflection of what we would expect the future mortality experience to be, then it is going to raise both the normal cost. It's going to increase our unfunded liability, so it's going to increase that amortization as well. So it would go up from 5,171,000 to 5,664,000. Let's see, one thing that Maria and I had talked about when I was sharing some of this information initially, I mentioned that the town is currently using 3-year asset smoothing, whereas the police plan is using 5-year smoothing. And I would say that 5-year smoothing is probably more typical in the governmental sector. if you did also change to a 5-year smoothing, it would drop that number about 50,000. I think it's actually 52,000. So then you'd be talking about $5,612,000. And then the one other assumption that Maria asked us to look at was, what if we did drop the discount rate from 7.25% down to 7%? And again, that would make the measurement of our liabilities go up. So it would increase. So if we updated the mortality and dropped the discount rate to 7%, then instead of going up to 5.6 million, it would be more like 5.8 million. So I think that's pretty much the information that we had to share today. So I'll stop sharing my screen and then see if there are any questions or discussion on your end.
Yeah. So what would all this do to the ARC? Are those numbers on that last page?
Yeah, the
ARC or something else?
The ARC is that term's actually been changed to actuarially determined contribution. So those are kind of synonymous. So the ARC and the actual, the ADC
that we have to budget for each year.
Right. Yeah. So that ADC, or the ARC as it was previously called, those are the numbers on that.
Okay. So right now, if we did nothing, it'd be 5.2 million. And if we go all the way to the most conservative assumptions, it would jump it up to 5.9 million almost.
Yeah, but if we did kind of change from 3 years to 5 years, then it would be down to about 5.8, a little bit more than 5.8.
If you had to choose, I mean, we'll talk about this, but if you had to choose one or the other, is there one that is more, you think is more pressing?
I mean, I think I would, well, I think I would go with the mortality change first. That's the one I would probably prioritize. The second one is actually doing both of those. It's updating the mortality and dropping the discount rate. I feel like if you went ahead and updated the mortality, that would be a great step for this year.
And how has this ADC changed over the last 4 years? What was it back in 18?
Yeah, I think it was about 5.2. I think it was between 5.2 and 5.3 in 2018, as well as it was in 2020.
So it's sort of doing what it's supposed to do by staying the same, because it's supposed to be a level pay to get to fully funded at the end. And if we increase that funding, it's possible that we'll have to contribute less and less over time, because you update this every year, right?
Well, we do it every other year. Yeah, and I know I don't know if anyone has questions about COVID. I know some people are thinking, oh, well, what about COVID? Does it change things? And there's definitely a lot of discussion going on about what is going to be the impact of COVID. And obviously in the short term, it's definitely had, we've definitely seen greater mortality than expected since, the second quarter of 2020. But we are seeing a little bit less of an increase recently, and in particular, kind of those of retirement age, 65 and over. We're seeing fewer excess deaths now than we did. So, I don't think there's any reason to think, personally, I don't think there's any reason to think, oh, 1994 table is going to be a better reflection of what we're expecting, given that we have COVID. So I still feel good that the table that came out in 2019 would be it would give us better measurements of what we really think the future is going to hold for the plan.
So the downside to not increasing this AD, it's no longer easily pronounced, AD,
Yeah.
is that we may have to increase it more down the road, because every 2 years you update things, and whatever assumptions you're using, you're going to get to the end, and there's less and less uncertainty the closer and closer you get to that end date.
That's exactly right.
We're going to get there one way or the other, but it's a question of whether we get sooner or later. And we've already been funding it at a much higher level than we had been in the past due to, previous governments, town governments, deciding that they wanted the money for things like paving roads instead of funding the pensions that we've promised our employees. Now at least we're doing a reasonable job of, funding the level that would get us to the end, and not have some huge amount due at the end. So we're probably, call it 90% of the way there, but it's a question of whether you want to be even more conservative in your assumptions. But it's not like the whole thing's going to blow up if we don't get all the way to 5.9 million.
That's right. That's right. I mean, yeah, you're exactly right that it is kind of a self-correcting process. And as the plan matures, there will be fewer and fewer unknowns. And the overall size of the plan will shrink as participants continue to work through the pension and eventually drop off on the other end. So, I mean, Kevin and I have worked on, we work on a group of plans that were, more unfunded than the town's plan, and kind of they probably got started on a plan earlier, like back in 2000, and the plans are doing really well. So I think kind of as you mentioned, Jim, kind of the importance of kind of the governmental oversight, and if those contributions are being put in, then you're going to end up getting to where you need to be so that there is money for all the retirees.
Hey, Jim, to give you some history, you asked what we've been putting into the fund, the ARC, for the last several years. In 2020, it was $5,227,000. In 2021 was $5,322,000. 2022 was $5,299,000. And this fiscal year, we actually put in $5,325,000.
Okay, so by going up to that 5.6, call it, if we do the 5-year smoothing,
It's $339,000 increase in the budget.
so that sounds like that could be swallowed by the town without too much.
Yeah, just keep in mind, the other plan is the police is also increasing. I think actually the police has a reduction by using just a mortality table. If I remember correctly, Brad.
I think that's right, a slight decrease.
Yeah.
And why is that again?
I think probably because of the smoothing.
Well, I think a factor with the police is that their retirees also get a cost of living adjustment to their pension. And so because salary increases have been lower the last couple of years, it's also reduced the expected liability for the retirees as well. So that plan's more sensitive, and they benefit more when raises are less than assumed.
But if the benefits are indexed to inflation rate, that's got to be a big increase in the liability this year, right?
Well, yeah, they're based on kind of the wage increases for the officers. So yeah, I'm not sure how that will play out.
CPI, I see.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And with the 3 to 5 year smoothing, I mean, there's no cost to the town. So
No,
why not?
it's yeah.
Yeah, I would consider going to the 5-year smoothing, just like the police. I'm not sure why they were different, how that started,
Yeah.
but I would say we should be the same.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, personally, I like doing that and going with mortality, but keeping the discount rate at the very, very optimistic 7.25 and revisiting that in the future, just not hitting a ton all at once with a giant increase. Because we're lucky that the town is doing its job of meeting the ADC. That's the key thing, and we don't want to jeopardize that.
Yeah.
And we did
I-
we cut the discount rate last year. We went from
Right.
7.5 down to 7.25, and that was kind of an interim move. So I think if we do obviously the update, the mortality, hopefully this is where I don't, as far as what the town was willing to absorb, I kind of have to defer to others as far as, I mean, ideally I would do everything if I could, but I know it's
Yeah.
not, I don't know how that can be swallowed.
Well, let me just tell you the increase in the budget. If we adjust it for both the mortality table and the discount rate, it's an impact of 541,000 just
A lot of money.
on the
Mhm.
town. And then the police, I believe, between the two is about 807,000 impact to the budget. I think it's hard to swallow 807,000 in the budget in 1 year. I suggest we just do the update for the mortality this year
Mhm.
and, review it again in 2 years. And, every year we've been doing one or the other. We've been making strides as to changing assumptions to make it more close to what it should be. I just don't think we can afford both.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've chipped away at, I think when I joined on the board several years ago, I think the discount rate was over 8% at
Yeah.
the time. So I think we made a lot of progress in making these assumptions more conservative. So I think doing the smoothing and the mortality assumption, we passed on that obviously 2 years ago. I think, again, maybe going for the discount rate. So, but I think we've been making great progress as far as taking the steps to make this a more conservative, realistic, plan assumptions.
Yeah, we have, I think it's 167 million in property tax receipts. So, that 800,000 is roughly 0.5%, which, taxpayers don't like any increase at all, of course, but it's
Yeah.
not going to be, that catastrophic to do.
And
the
it was a tough year with the reval and all that.
Mhm.
Taxpayers were not very happy already. So I don't know.
Yeah, because there was a shift back to resi from commercial.
Right. From commercial to residential.
Well,
Eric, you have
that
any
would be our
comments?
recommendation. Whether the town takes it or not is another question, but
Can the town say no?
yeah, I mean, the town wasn't even meeting the ARC for the longest time. It was only
Okay.
actually under Herbst that we started doing the ARC.
Right.
And then, fortunately, when Democrats came into power, they kept doing the right thing. So we've been doing this now, I think, for about 8 years or so. Is that right, Maria?
Since 2013 or something.
9 years.
We had there's an actual ordinance that went to the town council for approval that we must fund the ARC every year. And if we don't, we have to go to the town council for approval and give explanation why we have to change that.
Okay, that's good. So it's not that easy just to say no.
No, it's not easy.
But is it our committee that decides what assumptions to use, or is that something the town has input into?
I think
It's
in the
just-
past, the committee, the pension board made the recommendation. I mean, I'm making the recommendation from the first selectman that, I discussed it with her. And, obviously, we would like to do both assumptions, change both assumptions, that we just can't afford to do both this year.
Right.
And the police, are they updating the mortality and what is their return assumption?
They are updating the mortality. I have to speak with them because the same thing happened last time. We did exactly the same. They did exactly the same thing for the police pension that we did for the town. They did the same assumptions. So we'll go to them and make the same suggestion.
That would be consistent.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Any other questions?
No.
So can we have a motion to change from a 3 to a 5-year smoothing?
Yes, Brad, would you be able to do that too?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'll make that motion that we go to 5-year smoothing from 3.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second.
Thank you, Donna. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstain? And the motion passes. And how about would you have a motion to update the mortality assumption for the pension going forward?
Second.
I'll make that motion, I guess, unless someone else wants to.
Okay, I'll second.
Yeah. Second on Maria. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And abstain? I guess the motion passes. So I think we're,
And then as far as the return assumption, maybe we should vote to keep it at 7.25. I'll make that motion.
I will second that motion. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? And abstain? And the motion passes.
All right, we're good.
Is that
Thanks,
it?
Brad.
Great.
And Kevin, welcome
Thank
aboard.
you.
Thank you. Look forward
Enjoy
to
your
working with you.
retirement.
Yes,
Brad.
enjoy your retirement.
Thank you.
Good luck, Brad.
All right.
Yeah.
So should we have a motion to adjourn? Are we done?
Eric,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
woke up?
So
I'm
Eric?
sorry. I was listening the whole time. I also
I
was
know.
doing other
I was
work.
kidding.
So no.
I was kidding.
again,
Thank you for Thank you for calling my attention to it.
I still stumble over the rules here. I was ready to just turn off my iPad.
Yeah.
So we'll take that as your motion, Eric.
Yes.
I'll
Yes,
take the
please.
motion. Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right, we're-
Aye. All opposed? Abstentions? Motion passes. So we're done for the evening.
Great.
Happy holidays,
Happy
everyone.
holidays, everybody.
All
Happy
right.
New
Yes,
Year.
happy
Holidays.
holidays.
Bye.
Enjoy.
All right.
Good
Bye-bye.
to see
Bye,
everybody.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.